Ethan Miller had only been working the night shift at the Hollow Pines Hotel for 3 days when he realized he wasn't the only one clocking in after midnight. What started as a quiet job manning the front desk turned into a descent into something far darker, as Ethan began noticing figures on security cameras that didn't match any guest records, doors opening by themselves, and a version of himself that shouldn't exist. By the time he understood the truth, the hotel wasn't just watching him, it had made a place for him. I started working the night shift at a small, rundown hotel on the edge of the city. It wasn't a place anyone would choose unless they had no other option. Faded yellow wallpaper peeled from the walls, the carpet carried stains older than me, and the lights in the hallways flickered like they were afraid to stay on too long. But I didn't care, I needed the job. The pay wasn't great, but the hours were quiet, and most nights passed without incident, or so the manager claimed. On my first night, the manager showed me the basics before leaving just after 11. Check in guests, monitor the security cameras, refill the coffee machine if it runs low. The hotel rarely had more than a handful of guests, especially during the week. After midnight, it got dead quiet. The silence was heavy, like it belonged there. I sat behind the dusty front desk, trying to keep myself awake with weak coffee and a half-broken ceiling fan humming above my head. In front of me, a row of small security monitors lined the desk. 12 black and white screens showed the different parts of the hotel, the lobby, the parking lot, all 4 floors of hallways, the elevator, the stairwells. At first, I stared at them out of boredom, hoping something interesting would happen, maybe a drunk guest wandering the halls, or a raccoon sneaking in through the back entrance. Everything stayed still. Around 2 a.m. I started feeling drowsy. I leaned back in the squeaky chair, eyes heavy, when suddenly one of the screens flashed with static. It caught my attention right away. I leaned in closer and tapped the monitor lightly. It was the 3rd floor hallway. The image glitched again just for a second, but when it cleared, I noticed something that made my skin prickle. At the far end of the hallway, someone was standing still. Not walking, not moving, just standing there, at the edge of the dim corridor. I stared at the figure, trying to make out details. It was hard to tell. The camera quality was poor, and the image flickered with static now and then, but I could see the outline of a person. Pale face, slender frame, no movement. I looked at the check-in log on my screen. Only 2 rooms were occupied, both on the 2nd floor. No guests were placed on the 3rd floor. I checked again, just to be sure. 3rd floor was supposed to be completely empty. I glanced back at the screen. The figure hadn't moved an inch. I reached for the walkie-talkie the manager left for emergencies but stopped myself. What would I even say? That there was someone loitering on a floor with no guests. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it was an old recording. Maybe it was a trick of the lighting. Still, I couldn't stop looking at that screen. 5 minutes past 10. The figure remained frozen like a statue. Then I made the mistake of blinking. When I opened my eyes again, the hallway was empty. I sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the screen, hoping the figure would return, even though every part of me didn't want that. Nothing happened. I cycled through the other floors. 2nd floor quiet, 4th floor empty lobby, just me. Back to the 3rd floor. Nothing. I told myself I imagined it. The tired mind plays tricks. That's what everyone says, right? But just before 3 a.m., something else happened. A soft click came from the monitor speaker. A faint, barely noticeable sound like a door slowly creaking open. I checked all the screens again. Everything looked the same, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had just moved out of the camera's view. And whatever it wasn't supposed to be there. The 2nd night started off normal, but the memory of that strange figure on the monitor stayed with me. I kept thinking about how still it was. Not the kind of stillness you see in people, more like something waiting, like a shape pretending to be human. I tried convincing myself it had been a trick of the camera or some strange lighting angle, but deep down, I didn't believe that. There was something too specific about the way it stood, too deliberate. I didn't tell anyone. I figured if I talked about it, it might make it real. I arrived at the hotel a little before midnight. The lobby looked the same as always, dimly lit, quiet, the clock ticking too loudly on the wall behind the desk. The air smelled stale like old coffee and wet carpet. I signed in and did a quick walkthrough, checking the main hallway and stairwells. Nothing looked out of place. The silence pressed in on me as I walked. No voices, no guests, not even the distant hum of a vending machine. Just the sound of my own footsteps echoing off the walls. I settled in behind the front desk and pulled up the security feeds, the same 12 screens, showing the same still shots from the night before. I watched them closely this time. Every few minutes I cycled through them again and again, keeping a special eye on the 3rd floor hallway. For a while, nothing happened. The minutes crawled by, and I began to wonder if I was just feeding my own paranoia. Then, around 1:45 a.m., a red box flashed on the corner of the screen showing room 313, a motion alert. I froze. That room hadn't been booked in weeks. I remembered seeing a sticky note from the manager saying it was closed for maintenance. Though no one had ever gone in to fix anything, I opened the feed for that section of the hallway. The door to 313 was open, not fully, just a few inches. enough to see that it had definitely moved. I leaned closer to the monitor, heart pounding. The door swayed slightly, back and forth, like someone had pushed it and let it go. The hallway was completely still otherwise. No guests, no staff, no reason for that door to be open. I checked the system to confirm. Room 313 was unoccupied. No keycards had been issued. No one should have been near that room. I stared at the door for a long time, waiting to see if someone would step out. I even thought about going up to check it myself, but something inside me held me back. A heavy sense of dread settled in my chest. It wasn't just fear, it was the feeling that I wasn't supposed to interrupt whatever was happening. I switched to a different angle of the hallway. From that view, the door appeared closed. I cycled back to the original camera. The door was open again. Now something was standing in the gap, just barely visible. I could only make out a small part of a face peeking from behind the door, one eye wide open and black as pitch, greasy skin like it was covered in oil. A tangled mess of long dark hair clung to one side of the pale forehead. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It just stared out at the hallway, and I swear, for a second it seemed like it was staring directly into the lens, like it knew I was watching. I jerked back from the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. I looked away for only a second, just to steady myself, and when I looked back, the screen went black. All 12 monitors shut off at once. Static burst from the tiny speaker below the desk. The hum of electricity vanished. Just complete sudden silence. Then, one by one, the screens flickered back on. Everything was normal again. The door to room 313 was closed. I stared at the monitor, hands shaking, trying to understand what I had just seen. I reached for the logbook and scribbled down the time, the room number, and what had happened. I didn't know why, maybe to prove to myself later that it was real. But even as I wrote, I had the awful feeling that whatever was in that room knew I'd been watching, and maybe it had started watching back. The third night felt different the moment I stepped through the hotel doors. It wasn't just the stale air or the tired hum of the lights overhead. Was something deeper, something pressing against me the second I walked into the lobby, like the building itself had become aware of me. I felt it in my chest, an invisible weight that hadn't been there the nights before. I clocked in and did my usual walk through the ground floor. The vending machines buzzed softly in the hallway. The old ice machine rattled like it might fall apart any second. Nothing unusual, but the shadows felt heavier tonight. Even the lights seemed to flicker just a second longer than they should. I kept my eyes on the cameras for the first hour, especially the hallway outside room 313. No alerts, no motion. The door stayed shut. I tried to convince myself it was over. Maybe whatever I saw was tied to that one room, and now that it was gone, everything would go back to normal. I even started to relax a little, thinking maybe I could get through the night without any more strange moments. That feeling didn't last long. At 2:58 a.m., the front desk bell rang. It was sharp, loud, sudden. The sound echoed through the empty lobby, and I nearly jumped out of my seat. I looked up immediately. No one was there. I stood slowly, stepping out from behind the desk, eyes scanning the lobby. The front doors were shut, locked. No cars had pulled up outside. The security feed showed nothing, just me, alone. I backed toward the monitor and quickly rewound the footage from the lobby camera. My stomach dropped as the video played back. At exactly 2:58 a.m., the front doors opened, even though I never heard them. A tall man walked in. He wore a long dark coat. His face was pale blank, almost blurred by the low-resolution camera. He moved slowly to the desk, stood there for a few seconds, and then turned to look directly into the lens. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. Then, without turning around, he walked out of frame. I fast-forwarded the footage. He never left. I flipped through all the other feeds. Nothing in the hallway. Nothing in the stairwells. The elevators hadn't moved. He had come in and vanished. I stared at the screens, my hands cold and clammy. The hotel was silent again, too silent. I tried to shake it off, but the unease clung to me like something physical. I checked the back office, the maintenance room, even the utility closets. Nothing. No signs of anyone. When I returned to the desk, the old printer sitting on the shelf beside me began to whir. I nearly screamed. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't printed anything. The printer hadn't worked properly since I started, but now it was slowly feeding out a single sheet of paper. The sound felt deafening in the stillness. I stepped closer, watching the page emerge. No images, no paragraphs. Just one thing printed in the center in large, bold letters. 313. I stared at the number, my heart pounding so hard it made my vision blur. The page trembled in my hand as I held it. Room 313 again. It was like the hotel was reminding me, like it wanted me to go back. Or maybe, warning me to stay away. I set the paper down slowly and looked at the monitors again. The camera for the third-floor hallway had gone fuzzy. Just light static running across the image. I tapped the screen, hoping to bring it back into focus. The picture cleared for a second. The door to room 313 was wide open. I blinked, and just as quickly, it slammed shut on the screen. Not slowly, not gently. It slammed so hard the camera shook slightly. I backed away from the desk, heart racing, every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't know what was in that room. I didn't know if it was a person, a thing, or something else entirely. But I was starting to think that I was never meant to see it. And now that I had, it wasn't going to let me forget. By the fourth night, I was running on caffeine and nerves. I hadn't slept properly since the first shift, and even when I closed my eyes, I didn't rest. Images from the cameras replayed over and over in my head. Room 313's door creeping open, that face peering out, the tall man in the lobby. Every time I thought about quitting, something stopped me. It wasn't just curiosity. It felt like the hotel had a grip on me, like leaving would somehow make things worse, like it would follow me. I arrived a little after 11 p.m. and lingered outside the building longer than usual, staring up at the dark windows. The top floor lights were out, the third floor dimly lit, just like always. But I noticed something new, one of the fourth floor hallway lights flickering rapidly, as if something had disturbed the wiring. I told myself it was probably nothing, just another faulty bulb, another broken part of this place. Inside, the lobby looked the same, but the atmosphere was heavier. The air felt still, like the hotel was holding its breath. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing just out of view. I did my walkthrough quickly, checking the side doors and storage rooms, but everything seemed normal. Too normal. Back at the desk, I sat in front of the monitors, the usual black and white feeds filling the screens. I stared at them blankly for what felt like an hour. Time moved slowly in this place. The sounds around me faded into a kind of low hum. I kept watching the cameras, waiting for something to happen. Then, a motion alert pinged. Not on the third floor this time, on the fourth. My eyes locked onto the hallway feed. At first it was hard to tell what had triggered the alert. The lights on that floor were flickering again. The hallway was empty. But then something entered the frame from the left, slowly, crawling. It was low to the ground, like a person moving on hands and feet. But there was something wrong about how it moved. The limbs jerked, like they didn't bend the way they should. It dragged itself across the carpet, knees twisting at sharp angles. The head hung down until it reached the center of the hallway, then lifted slowly, almost unnaturally. Its face was distorted, too long, too thin, with hollow sockets where the eyes should be. A wide mouth stretched across the lower half of its face, lips torn and hanging loosely. It didn't blink, didn't stop. It reached the elevator and sat still for a moment, as if it were waiting. Then the doors opened. The thing moved inside, disappearing from view. I stared at the monitor showing the lobby elevator. The screen remained still. The numbers above the doors began to count down. 4, 3, 2. Then the elevator doors opened in the lobby. But no one came out. I waited. Nothing moved. The hallway in front of the elevator was empty, but I felt it. Something was there, watching, waiting. The hairs on my arms stood on end. The lights above the front desk dimmed slightly, just enough to make the room feel like it had sunk into something deeper, something darker. And then I heard it, breathing. Slow, heavy, coming from behind the wall next to the desk, just out of sight. It wasn't mechanical or distant. It was close. Close enough that I could hear the rhythm, the slight rasp in the exhale, the wet sound in the inhale. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The sound continued for several minutes. Steady, unnatural, like something pretending to mimic the way people breathe. My hands were shaking. My legs felt frozen. I couldn't bring myself to stand. Then the printer on the desk began to move again. Another page slid out, slow, like it was resisting. This one was different. It wasn't printed with the same clean font as the last one. The letters were jagged, smeared, almost scratched into the paper. He sees you. I stared at the message, heart pounding in my ears. When I finally dared to glance up at the monitors again, every camera feed was black, all except one. The feed from room 313. The door was open again, and this time, someone or something was walking out. I didn't want to come back for the fifth night. I told myself I was done. Whatever was in that hotel wasn't just something strange, it was dangerous. I could feel it. It had started small, flickering cameras, silent figures, empty rooms that weren't really empty. But now it wasn't hiding anymore. It was moving closer. I could sense it watching me through the screens, following me between shifts. I felt it in my apartment, in my dreams. I woke up at 3:13 a.m. every night now, without fail. Still, when the time came, I showed up. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or maybe the hotel wanted me back. That night, the building was darker than usual. The lights in the lobby flickered. When I unlocked the door, the front desk looked the same, but the chair was turned slightly facing away from the monitors, toward the fireplace in the corner. That was odd. I always left it pushed in. The air was thick, stale, almost sour, like something had rotted in the walls. I didn't do a walkthrough this time. I didn't want to know what might be waiting in the hallways or stairwells. I just sat behind the desk, hands clenched tight in my lap, eyes locked on the monitors. Every screen was dim, grayscale and fuzzy with static, but I stared anyway, waiting for something to move. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't work properly in that place anymore. Just after 3:30 a.m., the intercom crackled to life. I jumped. It hadn't worked since I started. A voice came through, raspy, distant, like a recording warped by age. At first I couldn't understand what it was saying, just static and syllables. Then, slowly it became clearer, repeating the same phrase over and over again. He's still in the chair. He's still in the chair. He's still in the chair. I stared at the speaker in disbelief, then turned toward the lobby. That's when I saw it. Someone was sitting in the chair by the fireplace. Not just someone, it was me. Same clothes, same posture, same blank expression. The other me sat facing the monitors, completely still, as if frozen in time. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at this reflection of myself, watching him from behind. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. I circled slowly around the desk, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. The other me sat motionless, eyes locked forward. The screens in front of him were no longer showing the usual feeds. Each one was filled with static, except for the center screen. That one showed the lobby just like a security camera view should. Except the angle was wrong. It wasn't from above the desk. It wasn't from any mounted camera I knew of. It was from behind me. From directly behind me. The me in the chair slowly began to smile, lips stretching far too wide, revealing a mouth full of teeth that looked far too sharp. I took a shaky step back. The figure's head tilted slightly, then sharply, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked too hard. Its smile never faded. Then all the monitors went black. The room was silent again. I looked around, but the chair was empty. I blinked, and suddenly I was in the chair, staring at 12 security feeds. But the images were wrong. Every screen showed the same place, the lobby. Me, sitting in the chair, but each one had something different in the background. A dark figure standing behind the desk, a face pressed against the glass entrance, a hand reaching around a corner, a shadow crawling across the ceiling. I tried to stand, but I couldn't move. My arms wouldn't respond. My legs were frozen in place. My reflection in the monitors didn't blink. It didn't breathe. But the other things on the screens began to move, each one by one, getting closer. One stepped behind me. Another appeared at the edge of the frame. The last one leaned in, until its face nearly filled the screen, skinless, hollow-eyed, a grin carved into the muscle. The printer started again. Another page slid out. I couldn't turn to read it, but I didn't have to. I already knew what it said. Now there's 2 of you.